Howdy, folks. Welcome to Saddle and Sixskin, your channel for stories of the Old West, tales of grit, survival, and the human spirit. If you love the classic westerns, the history of the frontier, and the stories of the men and women who shaped this land, then you've come to the right place. We're gonna take a look at the heart and soul of the Old West with tales of triumph and tragedy. So, pull up a chair, pour yourself a cup of coffee, and let's get started. Be sure to like and subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin so that you can be the first to see the new uploads, alright? Our story starts in the dry summer of 1874 in the Chirikahwa Mountains, a landscape painted in shades of dust and desperation. A little girl, no older than 8, is abandoned. My mom left me here and said she'd be back. It's been 3 days now, she whispers, clutching her doll. Clara is her name and she has endured days of abandonment, hunger, and heartbreak. A scene that would soften even the most calloused heart. The innocence of childhood against the harsh reality of survival. It is here where we meet Takai, also known as Nantan, an Apache warrior moving through the harsh terrain like a ghost. A man of the land. Silence surrounds him like a second skin, a comfort he has learned to embrace through years of solitude. Nights when memories clawed at him with questions he could never answer. Where are they? His mother who sang to him in the darkness, his father who taught him to read the wind. His cousins who shared his childhood games among these very stones. All vanished when the soldiers came in the deep of night, dragging a 12-year-old boy from everything he knew and thrusting him into a world of walls and bells and words that cut his tongue. By the time he escaped that place they called school, his family had scattered like leaves before a storm. So he walked alone. Now 32 summers behind him, carrying the weight of an unfinished life. What happened to his family? What was this so-called school that cut his tongue? What will happen to Clara? As Nantan tracks a wounded deer, he hears a sound that shatters the silence of the mountains, crying. Not the call of a hawk or the mournful note of a coyote, but something far more fragile, human tears. This makes him pause. His hand moves instinctively to the knife at his belt. In these territories, tears often meant trap, soldiers used women as bait, traders used children to lure unwary hunters into rifle sights, but something in this particular weeping makes him hesitate. There was no performance in it, no careful timing, only the raw sound of a heartbreaking in the wilderness. He circled wide, reading the ground with eyes that had learned to see stories written in bent grass and displaced pebbles. Child's tracks, small feet and worn shoes running at first, then stumbling, then dragging with the weight of exhaustion. No adult prints following, no horse hooves, no sign of ambush. And when he finally sees her, huddled beneath a scrub oak with her knees pulled to her chest, something in his chest pulled tight. She was perhaps 8 years old, her hair the color of wheat stubble, her dress more patches than original fabric. Dirt streaked her face in the tracks of dried tears and her feet, bare now and bleeding. Her shoes discarded somewhere behind her. But it was what she clutched against her chest that made Nantan's breath catch. A doll sewn from scraps of cloth with careful loving hands. Black buttons for eyes, yellow yarn for hair, tiny stitches that spoke of someone who cared enough to make something beautiful from nothing. This doll, a symbol of hope and love in a world filled with despair. Remember to subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin and hit the like button, will ya? The girl looks up as his shadow fell across her. For a moment, neither moved. Her eyes were the pale blue of a winter sky, wide with fear, but holding something else too. A kind of desperate hope. "Please don't hurt me," she whispered, her voice ragged from crying and thirst. Nantan knelt slowly, making himself smaller, less threatening. "I won't hurt you, little one." He spoke in English, carefully shaped. "What is your name?" "Clara Whitmore," she replied. "Are you going to take me back to town? Where is your family?" This question opened fresh tears. "Mama said she'd come back. She said to wait right here by the spring, and she'd come back for me." Her words hung in the air heavy with unanswered questions. That was, she paused, trying to count on fingers sticky with dust and sorrow. 3 days ago, maybe 4. I can't remember. 3 days in this heat without proper water or food. It was a miracle the child still lived. Nantan felt something stir in his chest, a protective instinct he thought had died with his own lost family. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "What do you think is going to happen to them? Do you think that her mother will return? Well, stay tuned, because we have so much more of the story coming to you. I have food and water. Will you let me help you?" Another nod. This one smaller, uncertain. Nantan moved with deliberate slowness as he opened his pack and drew out jerked meat, dry corn cakes, and his water skin. He handed them to the girl and watched as she drank with desperate gulps, then forced herself to stop and eat with careful tiny bites. Someone had taught her not to waste food. "Your mother," he said gently as she ate. "Did she say why she had to leave?" Clara's eyes filled again. "There were bad men. They came to our house at night, and Mama got scared. She said we had to run, had to hide. She brought me here and told me to stay hidden until she came back." The small voice wavered, "But she hasn't come back." Nantan felt the familiar clench of anger in his chest. These bad men, they take what they wanted from those too weak to fight back. Single woman alone with children made easy targets for the kind of predators who thrived in the spaces between law and civilization. "I'm going to build you a shelter," he told Clara. "And we'll wait together. But first, I need to look for signs of what happened to your mama. Will you be brave for me while I'm gone? You'll come back?" The question held a lifetime of abandonment. "I will come back," he promised, meaning it with a certainty that surprised him. "I give you my word." We are right at the halfway mark in our story. Are you enjoying it so far? Well, be sure to give that like button a push for us, would you? Also, take a look at our other videos here at Saddle and Sixkin. Clara considered this with the gravity of someone much older. Mama said never trust strangers. But she looked at the water skin he'd given her, the careful way he'd built a small shade with branches in his own jacket. "You're different." "Different how?" "You don't look at me like I'm something you want to take." The words hit harder than any physical blow. This child had learned too young to recognize hunger in men's eyes, to understand that kindness often came with a price. But she also had the instinct to know when it didn't. As Clara settled into the makeshift shelter with her doll and his remaining supplies, Nantan began the work he knew best, reading the story written in the broken landscape around them. The tracks were there for those who knew how to see them. Clara's small footprints running in panic. An adult woman's shoes, walking. Dragging, stumbling. And then nothing for 20 yards where the trail led to harder ground. But the ground always told its secrets to those patient enough to listen. Nantan found the broken twig first, snapped at the height of an adult's shoulder. Then the thread caught on a thorn, blue cotton that matched Clara's dress, but in better condition. A mother's dress, torn in haste or struggle. And there, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for, a drop of dried blood on a stone. The trail led north toward the freight road that connected the scattered settlements of the territory. It was a route favored by traders and travelers, but also by the kind of men who preyed on those foolish enough to travel alone. Have you folks given that subscribe button a whirl yet? We'd sure appreciate you doing it. Let's get back to the story, shall we? As afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Nantan found what he'd been dreading. A small clearing beside the road, marked by the ashes of an old fire. Boot prints in the dust. At least 3 different sets. The prints of a woman's shoes, scuffed and dragged. Signs of a struggle. And there, half hidden beneath a crease-out bush, a piece of cloth that made his blood run cold, blue cotton, torn and stained with dried blood. Wrapped around it, a hair ribbon that matched the one Clara wore around her neck. It was the carved wooden sign nearby that told him everything he needed to know. Thomas Creek Ranch, 5 miles, and scratched into the weathered wood with a knife crude letters that spelled Thomas. Thomas. Clara had mentioned that name, a man who visited their house whom her mother owed money. Nantan touched the blood-stained cloth and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not just anger, but purpose. This child waiting for him by the spring had already been abandoned by the world once. He wouldn't let it happen again. Will he find the mother? Will he be able to bring justice to these men who harmed them? It's going to be quite a ride, so stay with me, would you? The ride back to Clara seemed longer than the tracking had taken. She was where he'd left her, curled in the shade with the rag doll pressed against her cheek, but her eyes were open and watching for his return. "Did you find her?" she asked. The hope in her voice nearly broke his heart. Nantan sat beside her in the dust, choosing his words with the care he'd once used to choose arrows for a hunt. "I found signs. Your mama didn't leave you by choice, Clara. Bad men took her." "Is she? Is she dead?" Clara's voice caught. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." He looked at the small girl, this unexpected responsibility that had changed everything. "There's a place I know. Safe. People there will take care of you while I..." "No." Clara's voice was small but firm. "Don't leave me. It might be dangerous where I'm going. It's dangerous everywhere." She clutched the doll tighter. "At least with you, I know you'll come back. You promised." The trust in those words humbled him. When had anyone last believed in his word with such complete faith? "There's a settlement called Dry Creek," he said finally. "Some of my people live there now, mixed in with others who don't fit anywhere else. There's an old woman there, Hattie, who has a kind heart. You'll take me there?" "Yes." "And you'll come back for me?" "Yes." Clara studied his face in the dying light. "What's your name?" "Your real name?" "Nantan. It means spokesman in my language." "What do you speak for?" The question caught him off guard. What did he speak for? For years he'd spoken for nothing but his own survival, his own bitter solitude. For those who have no voice, he heard himself say. For the lost ones. Clara nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "Then I guess you speak for me now." That night, as they shared his blanket under stars that seemed closer than they had in years, Nantan felt something shift inside him. For the first time since childhood, he wasn't alone in the wilderness. For the first time in years, someone depended on him for more than just trade or temporary labor. For the first time in his adult life, he had something worth fighting for. Dry Creek sat in a fold of desert hills like a secret someone was trying to keep. It wasn't much to look at, a collection of adobe houses, a few corrals, a well that produced water that tasted of metal and hope. But it was home to people who didn't fit anywhere else. Former Apache who'd grown tired of war, Mexicans who'd crossed the wrong people, whites who'd married outside their color, mixed-blood children who belonged fully to no world. How many of you fine folks out there have been to Dry Creek? Elder James Wright ruled this small kingdom with the iron certainty of a man who'd found his purpose late in life. He'd been a preacher once before the Apache Wars taught him that God's mercy had its limits. Now he dispensed a different kind of salvation, order imposed on chaos, respectability carved from rebellion. Martha Whitmore had been cast out from Dry Creek 2 years ago. The details varied depending on who told the story, but the heart of it was always the same. She'd taken up with a man who wasn't her husband, had a child out of wedlock, brought shame on a community that couldn't afford to lose what little respectability it had scraped together. Did she really bring shame to the community, or was this just the gossip of small minds? That woman made her choices, Elder Wright said when Nantan brought Clara to his door. And choices have consequences. I won't have her kind of scandal threatening what we've built here. They stood on the porch of Wright's house while Clara waited by the horses, just out of earshot, but close enough to sense the tension in the adults' voices. Nantan kept his own voice low, respectful, but there was steel underneath. The child needs help. Her mother is missing, probably dead. What sins did an 8-year-old girl commit? The sins of the mother fall on the child, Wright replied, but his eyes avoided Clara's small figure. That's Bible truth, Apache. That woman brought nothing but trouble when she lived here. Her daughter will do the same. He can't stay here. Her name is Clara. I don't care what her name is. Nantan had expected this response, but it still kindled a familiar anger in his chest. He'd seen this before, communities of outcasts who survived by making others more outcast than themselves. It was human nature, perhaps, this need to find someone to stand below you. But that didn't make it right. She's just a child, he said again. And you're Apache, Wright replied. Your kind aren't known for their charity. Why do you care what happens to one white child? The question hung in the desert air between them. Why did he care? Because she'd been abandoned the way he'd been abandoned? Because her tears reminded him of his own? Because in her desperate trust, he'd found something he thought he'd lost forever? Stay tuned here at Saddle and Sixskin, where the end is near but the story never dies. Because someone should, he said finally. Before Wright could reply, a voice spoke from the shadows beside the house. Bring her here. An old woman emerged into the fading light, moving with the careful steps of someone who'd earned every one of her many years. Hattie Clearwater had Cherokee blood mixed with Mexican, African, and God knew what else. Her face was a map of the frontier, lined with hardship, weathered by sun and sorrow, but with eyes that still held kindness. Hattie, Wright warned. We discussed this. You discussed it, Hattie replied mildly. I listened. There's a difference. She looked at Clara, who stood beside the horses with the patient acceptance of someone used to adult decisions being made about her life. What's your name, child? Clara Whitmore, ma'am. Whitmore? Hattie chewed on the name like it tasted of old memories. Your Mama Martha? Yes, ma'am. Do you know her? I knew her. Hattie's voice held a careful neutrality. Come here, child. Clara approached slowly, still clutching her rag doll. Hattie knelt with effort, bringing herself to eye level with the girl. You hungry? Yes, ma'am. When's the last time you had a proper bath? I don't remember. You got anywhere else to go? Clara's eyes found Nantan, then returned to Hattie. No, ma'am. Then I guess you're staying with me for a while. Hattie stood, her joints protesting. James, Wright. You can disapprove all you want from your own house. This child is coming home with me. Hattie's voice carried the weight of authority and frustration. That woman is gone, and this child is here now. She didn't choose her mother any more than you chose yours. Hattie's tone was gentle but immovable. In my house, children get fed and cared for first. We'll worry about their pedigree after they're safe. Nantan felt something ease in his chest. He'd hoped Hattie would be what he remembered, practical, compassionate, uninterested in the kind of judgment that infected places like weeds. I have to leave, he told Clara as Hattie bustled around, gathering blankets and setting water to heat. I have to look for your mother. I know. Clara's voice was smaller than her 8 years should have made possible. Will you come back? I'll come back. Promise? I promise. What happens to Martha? Does she live? Does she die? That night, as Nantan rode away from Dry Creek under a star-runk sky, he carried with him the sound of Clara's voice calling goodbye from Hattie's doorway. It was the first time in 20 years that someone had watched him leave who cared whether he returned. But before he could think about returning, he had a promise to keep and a truth to uncover. Thomas Creek Ranch lay 2 days hard riding to the north, and with it answers that might save a child's mother or confirm her worst fears. As his horse found its rhythm beneath him, Nantan realized he was no longer just tracking a missing woman. He was hunting the kind of men who stole everything that mattered and left children crying by springs in the middle of nowhere. And for the first time in his adult life, he was not alone in that hunt. Clara's trust rode with him, a responsibility heavier than any burden he'd ever carried, and somehow lighter than the emptiness that had defined his solitude. Thomas Creek Ranch squatted in a valley like a scar on the landscape. From his position on the ridge above, Nantan could see why Thomas had chosen this place, a natural fortress of rock walls and narrow approaches. It was perfect for someone who needed to be difficult to find but easy to defend. He'd spent 2 days getting here, following freight roads and cattle trails, asking careful questions in dusty towns where strangers were noticed but not necessarily remembered. The picture that emerged was of a man who operated in the spaces between law and chaos, Thomas Brennan, who ran cattle that weren't always his, who lent money at rates that broke men, who had a taste for women who couldn't say no. What kind of man is Thomas Brennan? The kind of man who would take a desperate mother's promise to pay and turn it into something else entirely. Nantan had circled the ranch through the long afternoon, noting the positions of guards, the number of horses, the weak points in their casual security. These weren't soldiers or professional gunmen, just ranch hands with more meanness than sense. They drank too much, talked too loud, and watched the horizon instead of the ground. As darkness fell, he made his approach. The first guard never knew what hit him. A shadow detached itself from the rocks. A hand closed over his mouth, and he fell unconscious to the desert floor. Nantan took his rifle and moved on. The second guard had time to recognize that death was coming, but not time to prevent it. A thrown knife found its mark, and another obstacle vanished into the desert silence. The ranch house itself was a long, low building of adobe and timber with light leaking from shuttered windows and the sound of rough laughter drifting into the night. Nantan crept close enough to peer through gaps in the wooden shutters. Inside, he could see them, 5 men around a table thick with smoke and empty bottles, playing cards with the careless concentration of those who knew they were safe in their stronghold. What's he going to do to them? Well, you are going to have to stick around right to the very end, now won't you? And in the corner, bound to a heavy wooden chair, was a woman. Martha Whitmore had once been pretty. Nantan could see that even through the bruises that darkened her face, the torn dress, the way she held herself with the careful stillness of someone who'd learned not to attract attention. Her hair was the same wheat gold as Clara's, her eyes the same pale blue. But where Clara's eyes held hope, Martha's held only endurance. I tell you again, Martha, one of the men was saying. His voice was cultured, educated, but with the cruel undertone of someone who enjoyed having power over others. All you have to do is sign the papers. Sign over the homestead to cover your debt, and this all ends. I told you, Martha's voice was hoarse but steady. I don't owe you anything. That money was for supplies, not interest. The man, Thomas, Nantan assumed, laughed. Interest is whatever I say it is. You borrowed $50 6 months ago. At my rates, that's now $500. The homestead might cover it if I'm feeling generous. That's robbery. That's business. But I might be willing to negotiate other payment methods. His touch made Nantan's blood turn to fire. He'd seen enough. Will Nantan save her? That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? The window was latched from the inside, but the wood was old, and the latch was loose. A knife blade slipped between the shutters persuaded it to give way without noise. Nantan slipped inside like smoke, moving along the wall toward the corner where Martha sat. She saw him first, her eyes widening, but she'd learned control the hard way. No gasp, no sudden movement to betray his presence. Just the slightest nod to show she understood. Nantan drew his knife and cut her bonds with 2 quick slashes. Martha rubbed circulation back into her wrists but remained still, waiting. It was Thomas who noticed first that something was wrong. Perhaps it was the draft from the open window, Or maybe just the instinct that came from years of wrongdoing. He turned from the card table, his hand moving toward the gun at his belt. Who? Nantan's knife took him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his pistol clattering across the floor. The other 4 men scrambled to their feet, reaching for weapons, shouting in confusion. Run! Nantan told Martha. She didn't argue. While Nantan engaged the men, using furniture as shields, throwing knives with deadly accuracy, turning their own drunkenness against them, Martha fled into the night. By the time the sun rose over Thomas Creek Ranch, 2 men were dead. 2 more were badly wounded, and Thomas Brennan was tied to the same chair where he'd kept Martha prisoner. Are these men worthy of his mercy? Would you show them any? Nantan sat across from him, cleaning blood from his knife with deliberate slowness. You made a mistake, Nantan said quietly. You took something that didn't belong to you. Thomas' shoulder was bandaged, but bleeding through. His educated voice shook with pain and fury. She owed me. She owed you $50 for supplies. That's all. Nantan's voice remained calm, conversational. The rest is what you call interest. I call it theft. You can't just, I'm Apache, Nantan said. We have different ideas about justice than your courts do. He leaned forward, letting Thomas see the knife in his hands. The woman you took has a daughter. 8 years old. You left that child alone in the desert to die while you played your games. I didn't know about any child. Now you do. Nantan stood. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to forgive the debt, all of it, and you're never going to go near Martha Whitmore or her daughter again. And if I refuse? Nantan smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Then I'll come back, and next time I won't be interested in conversation. He left Thomas tied to the chair and walked out into the morning sun where Martha waited beside the horses. She looked older in daylight, worn by hardship and fear, but there was strength in her too, the kind that bent without breaking. Thank you, she said simply. Can you ride? Yes. Then we need to go. Your daughter is waiting. But as they prepared to leave, Martha's hand touched his arm. Wait, she said. There's something I need to tell you. The pain in her voice made him pause. What? I can't go back to Clara. The words hit him like a physical blow. What do you mean? Martha's eyes filled with tears she wouldn't let fall. They'll never leave us alone if I go back. Men like Thomas and worse. Clara, she'll be safer without me. She's 8 years old. She needs her mother. She needs to live. Martha's voice broke on the words. They cast me out of Dry Creek for good reason. I made mistakes, brought trouble. If I go back to her now, that trouble follows. So many questions. The biggest one being, where is she going? What will Clara think? Be sure to tap that subscribe button there at Saddle and Sixkin and let's see the story, shall we? But if I disappear, if you disappear, she'll spend her whole life waiting for you to come back. Better that than spending it running from my mistakes. Nantan wanted to argue, wanted to force her to see that a child's love was worth any risk, but looking at Martha's face, at the weight of exhaustion and desperation, he understood this was a woman who'd already lost everything except her daughter, and now she was choosing to lose that too, in the hope that it might save Clara from sharing her fate. Where will you go? He asked finally. Mexico, south, somewhere they'll never find me. She looked back toward the ranch house one last time. Will you tell her? What? That I loved her enough to let her go. And with that, Martha Whitmore mounted her horse and rode south toward the border toward a life of exile and solitude, leaving her daughter's future in the hands of an Apache who understood the weight of abandonment. Nantan watched until she disappeared into the heat shimmer, then began the long ride back to Dry Creek with a conversation that would break a child's heart. It all comes down to this. Will our heroes find happiness? Well, I sure would appreciate it if you gave that like button one last push and let's see how it all ends. Clara was waiting in Hattie's garden when Nantan returned, sitting beneath a ramada of akata branches, carefully mending a tear in her rag doll's dress. 3 days with Hattie had already worked small miracles. The child was clean, her hair braided with ribbon, her cuts bandaged and healing, but her eyes held the same watchful weariness they'd carried by the spring. "Did you find her?" Clara asked, not looking up from her sewing. Nantan dismounted slowly, his body aching from hard riding and harder choices. How do you tell a child that her mother loved her enough to abandon her? How do you explain that sometimes the deepest care looked like the cruelest betrayal? I found her. Clara's hand stilled on the doll. Is she dead? No. Is she hurt? She was. She's better now. When is she coming to get me? The question he'd been dreading. Nantan knelt in the dust beside Clara's chair, putting himself at her eye level the way Hattie had done. She's not coming, Clara. The small hands dropped the doll entirely. What do you mean? She can't come back. The men who took her, there are more like them. If she comes back, they'll find her. They'll hurt her, and they'll hurt you too. But she promised. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. She said she'd come back for me. Sometimes people can't keep their promises, no matter how much they want to. So what happens to me? It was the question Nantan had been wrestling with during the entire ride from Thomas Creek Ranch. What happened to a child with no family, no home, no claim on anyone's protection? In the territories, such children usually ended up in institutions or workhouses, if they survived at all. Most didn't. I don't know, he admitted. Clara picked up her doll again, holding it close to her chest. Will you leave me here with Miss Hattie? Would you want that? Miss Hattie is kind. She tells good stories and makes biscuits. Clara's voice was carefully steady, the tone of someone trying to convince herself as much as others. I could stay here and help her learn to cook and sew properly, but you promised you'd come back and you did. Clara looked at him directly for the first time since he'd arrived. My mama promised too, but she didn't come back. So maybe promises don't matter. They matter to me. Do they? Or are you just saying that because you feel sorry for me? The question cut deep. Did he pity this child? Of course. But was that all it was? I feel sorry for you, he said honestly. But that's not why I came back. Then why? Because, the words came slowly, fighting their way through years of careful solitude. Because when someone trusts you with their life, you don't walk away from that. And because I know what it's like to be lost, to have everyone you love disappear. What happened to your family? Soldiers took me away when I was young. When I finally got free, I couldn't find them again. Do you still look for them? Sometimes. But they might not even be alive anymore. It was a long time ago. Clara considered this, her child's mind working through the implications. So, we're both lost. Yes, maybe we could be lost together. The simple words hit him like a revelation. Maybe they could be lost together. Maybe that was better than being lost alone. Clara, he said carefully. What if I told you I know a place where we could live? Not here in town, but up in the mountains. A quiet place where no one would bother us, where you could be safe? Would you go away and come back like you do now? I would stay. Clara was quiet for a long moment, studying his face with the intensity children brought to important decisions. What about Miss Hattie and the other people here? They'd always be your friends. We could visit, and they could visit us. And if the bad men came looking, I would protect you. Promise? I promise. Clara hugged her doll tighter. The place in the mountains, does it have a name? Not really. It's just a cabin I built near a stream where the pinyon trees grow thick, but we could give it a name if you wanted. Could we call it home? The word hung between them, simple and profound. Home. Nantan hadn't had a home in 20 years, hadn't even dared to want one, but looking at this small girl who'd already lost everything, who was offering him her trust again despite having it broken, he felt something shift inside him. Maybe home wasn't a place you were born to. Maybe it was something you built with your own hands, with the people who chose to stand beside you when the world grew dark. Yes, he said. We could call it home. Well, that's all we have for today here at Saddle and Sixskin. If you liked what you saw, then please give us a subscribe to see more stories just like this. So, from me and Clara, hasta la vista.